I will turn off the camera.
All right. Oh well, we'll have to deal without you. So,
Yeah.
first of all, I had a little time to look at Insurgents, but it's kind of hard to. I need a verbal discussion.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I need a verbal discussion from the point of view of romantic imagination. Let's do that. Let's do that untrue idea that the visual imagination is everything and all the numbers is just bullshit. I know that's not true, but let's pretend for a second that it's true, and tell me what play or characters look like and what they're doing.
Sure. Edgar, do you want to go ahead or?
Yeah. So in this game, what we want to do, if we need an imagery, and let's imagine a journey where our characters are pulled in a group that are well, I don't know how to make the color for this. Maybe help me.
One of the ideas I had was imagine a cyberpunk future, a big corporation with thousands of employees, and at the bottom of the company of the archaeology, there's this group of people who work for the company, but who have come together and decided that they cannot allow the corporation to continue unchecked, that they cannot be a participant in their evil anymore, and that from within they're going to rise to the top through the corporation, through the people there, and take it down.
Edgar, does this sound like something you had in mind?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay.
One of the genders, yeah, on the genres.
And so it doesn't really matter to me if the game can do different genres. We're just picking one that we know that it should work for.
Yeah, that's how it went.
Perfect.
Yeah, so, like the cyberpunk stuff was just like one idea.
But we'll stick with it. But we'll stay with it.
Sure.
In that case, what are the dynamic aspects? Is this a puzzle to be solved? Is the idea to simply go through a series of obstacles that make it hard? Or are there other dynamic elements of what they're doing that are, capture our attention while we play?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a game about. So we have this corporation that we want to bring it down, and we want to know if our characters are going to do it, sacrificing his relationships, corrupting themselves with the power of the corporation itself. And
so let's begin with, and you tell me if I'm on the right track here. Correct me if the game won't do what I'm saying. We're going to start with somebody whose job was to teach children at about age 7 years old. So they're a what in the United States we would say first grade or second grade teacher. And they have their curriculum, their textbooks. They have simultaneously high expectations for indoctrinating these children specifically, but also the crappiest possible working conditions and materials to do it with. Mm-hmm. And they have met, for example, a veteran of some military action who was supposed to give up his cyber limb, and get their shitty prosthesis instead, but has actually kept the cyber limb and has it for when he wants it, it gets strapped on and he's got the military cyber limb, kind of secret that he has this. So, and the two of them are friends and have realized that each other is trustworthy. Mm-hmm. we can come up with a couple of other characters like this too. The reporter who lost their job, right, and now is trying to set up an off the grid news, something like that. So the three of them have become friends. The three of them have arrived at a meeting of minds about what they think, the world should look like instead. So we're about to play our first session. Are we at least a little bit excited?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And one thing I would add is that there's this connection between the characters and the corporation itself. Like, for example, the military guy, that robotic arm probably was given by the corporation.
Absolutely.
itself.
Who else? Completely. So it's personal for all of them. Now, now I'm going to do something a little unusual. Let's pretend we have played a lot of sessions. Tell me what the characters look like now. In fact, we'll take turns. Edgar, tell me what the teacher looks like now.
Well, the teacher has passed by many stages. He has come with friends and rivals. He have understood that the corporation which he worked was trying to impose their ideals on the world, and trying eagerly to finish off the corporation. Maybe we are at the top of this corporation.
That's what I'm seeing, is that he actually pretended to stay in the system, and now is the director of a whole school district or something. Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at them, so when I first looked at him, he was one of these kind of scruffy-looking, underpaid teachers, and he looks haunted, and is probably about to get arrested for teaching the kids the wrong thing and stuff like that. But when we see him now, he looks powerful.
Yeah.
He looks like he could be fitting in.
Yeah. And he has people around him that does their bidding, and it's here to help him make his idea of destroying the corporation.
Right.
work.
He's carefully creating a network that even its own members don't necessarily know that they're part of for this. Are these assets on his character sheet by chance? This network of power that he's got constructed, is that like a trait or something?
They could be. We haven't, we've talked about having this kind of thing. We haven't got around to.
Okay. So that's what I'm thinking. Remember, in a lot of games, play is only the way that a character sheet makes a new character sheet.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just thinking about the representation.
Although
systemic representation of the characters, how it changes.
We do have relationships that are forced through play and that evolve and change, and new ones.
So those are changed. Where there's a whole bunch of places on the sheet where things were added, crossed out, new ones.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So
names
that's right.
of
Perfect.
people.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay. So then, Ahel, your turn. And I saw, who do you think, considering it's the first one that you gravitated for in the first place, Mr. Cyber Tech Military Person? So...
I'm a 90s kid. I could not about doing cable.
Right.
So now this guy with a robotic, who used to have just one robotic arm, now it's like full, almost a complete robot himself.
Right.
Like very little of flesh and bones remains of him, and all of that he has gained through possibly working for the corporation itself through this whole time, not necessarily employed for them, but to pay for his new limbs, to pay for all that. He has to kind of work for them and do their bidding, but he has become powerful.
Right. He has rank now. He's in charge of things, or he's valued in some way. In fact, he might even be valued in monetary terms. Literally, you are worth this much. You represent this much investment by these banks. to make you. So you're valuable to us. We can't lose this investment. So here's the thing. We are seeing characters who have 3 interacting parts. I'm not saying those have to be scores. I'm not saying they have to be quantified. But somehow, soft or hard, in mechanics terms, 3 things are working together here. One is the character's backstory and motivations at the very beginning of play. One of them is the assets and status and success in terms of the enemy. Right? In terms of the enemy, what is good, what is successful, what is high status. Well, they have some of that. They didn't go off and form a revolutionary cell living in a cave somewhere. They've got this side of what they have developed. And then finally, they have this network of people or these interactions and activities which are subversive, which are insurgent. Mm-hmm. Now, those are 3 very different things. And the way that they interact with the character should never stop, right? All 3 of them. If you lose one of them along the way, you've lost your character. Your character isn't very interesting in terms of the game anymore. You can definitely see how some of those pieces could conceivably be lost. Now, you talked about the corruptive activity of the status of the new. So on the sheets, looking at both, let's just take these 2 characters for now. Looking at them, how do we know, looking at the sheet, that although they feel they have been hiding in the corporation, disguising themselves, acting the part, how on the sheet do we see that it's kind of getting to them anyway?
We have a stat of corruption. So when you mark corruption, you get corrupted, and that marks of corruption makes, eventually, at the end of the game, makes the cause corrupted, and the game ends.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So this is about the price of. I get it. We see the dynamics. Hill, what were you going to say?
Yeah, one of the ways, kind of the more immediate ways, is that as you use corruption dices, you risk accumulating corruption points. We are not very original with that kind of stuff. And when you get to a certain number of them, and if you don't clean them, then you get I don't know if we have a name for it, but basically you can get a scar. That means that you always have to roll corruption dices, and there's a table of different effects that you have to pick every time, like mark a scar, a friend becomes an enemy, you lose someone you care about, that kind of stuff. And that table is shared by the whole group, and if you mark everything in that table and there's nothing else to mark, the last one is you lose.
Right. Now, does the table have more than one column, so you can have different things tracking down, or is it all just one thing?
Column right now with several marks on different.
Right. Okay. So that's interesting. I am getting the idea, however, that we have to be careful about cause and effect. So if you have to lose your spouse because you've accumulated the corruption, does that mean that how do you do that if nothing in play has led to that? You see, sometimes mechanics of that kind force things into play that aren't really justified by the fiction yet, and therefore it becomes very contrived feeling. Oh, I guess I have to lose my wife now.
We thought about a stage after the play where we can justify that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
we have a reflection moment where we see what happened with. and why he lost it.
Right.
Yes.
I'm going to suggest two things. No, three. Whether you like any of them is a different question, because the degree to which they are successful in terms of these variables is debatable. But one of them is Robert Bowles' game Misspent Youth, which I'm sure Angel has. And then the other one is oh geez, wait, I had it in my mind.
Bliss Stage.
Close. Shock.
Oh, Shock.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Bliss Stage, I get how that's connected. That makes sense. But Shock is the one I'm thinking about, because Shock is what's the word I want? A little more flexible, a little more momentary in terms of how things change and what's going on. And then there's my game which is just a draft at this time, called America, which is about the militant groups in the 1970s. And all of these games have episodes. All of these games have a comparison of what you might think of as mission success versus psychological and relationship price. And all of them require the player to care about the issue. Shock doesn't really have this kind of mission-y feel. Bliss Stage is a good one to bring into it too, because it's very mission-y. And all of them have activities that the characters are attempting to implement. And all of them have ambiguities. I'm not so sure about Misspent Youth in this regard, but all of them have ambiguities about the character's real relationship to power. So, and Shock in particular is quite good at, without really dictating it too much, is really good at your character changing in ways that make a lot of sense, but are carefully quantified. So, and there's no doubt about it. There's never, in playing Shock, there's never any reason to look at what happened and say, but I don't see how my guy would go that way. You do see why they would go that way. The way the dice went and the way it should go make a lot of sense together. So that's the game I was thinking of when I was talking about the slight danger of, okay, well, this is going to happen, but I don't feel like that would be happening. Shock does a good job. So those are some of the games that I would, we can talk more about America another time. But anyway, so those are some games that I have in mind. Let's talk a little bit more systemically. You talked about the corruption score. What about the assets? What about the sheet is a difference from having just that one secret cyberarm and his shitty prosthesis that he used most of the time? What's the what does the sheet show us, and particularly the procedures of play? What do they show us about his RoboCop body later? What do they look like mechanically, the difference between the two?
When you get corrupted, the more you get corrupted, the more you use that money to get prosthesis and cyber implants and that stuff. You get more red dice, which are corruption dice. So you have to always use it. It makes you more powerful, but at the cost of having a minus on the fudge dice.
Right. And when it can come up in a negative way.
Yeah.
Excellent. So that's excellent. I want to ask you something else about the fudge dice. Specifically, do you use them in the fudge way of minuses and pluses canceling each other out?
Yeah, but
well, this is interesting. And then the
We
minuses. Go ahead.
We're in them in free pool, so it's different. It's not only a roll, and we cancel dice. We assigned to free pools the minus, the pluses, and the zeros.
Yeah, we basically borrowed the idea of assigning dices to 3 different priorities from Siren.
Right. That actually has its roots in.
Other kind?
Yes, exactly. And so my take is that that's very good, because fudge dice rolled traditionally only really works well for fudge. Where you are basically you want the character to perform at the sheet's rate most of the time.
Yeah, you make a Gauss curve, right?
Right, very, very strict one too. It's extremely fixed, and so in many ways, the fudge dice in fudge operate to make sure the dice don't screw things up very much.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't work very well for systems where you want the dice to speak in interesting ways. And when I did my little proto game, The People's Hero. Yeah.
So you have to distribute in free pools, and the free pools have different results depending on how many pluses total.
Right.
Kind of.
We don't we don't care about if you got 3 pluses at the end or 3 or whatever.
Right.
We just want 3 results. So you divide the dice up among 3 pools.
And then the pluses and minuses cancel within each pool. Because that I get. Yes, that's really cool. Okay, I get it. That's actually a really good use. As soon as you said fudge dice, I was like, we're gonna have to worry about the math here. Do people really understand what those dice do?
We talked before.
We had this when we were designing this. We have this voice of Ron. Do you really need to use fudge dice all the time?
Man, this is terrible. I was consulting behind my own back before we had the call. All right, so good. We're good there. Now, in that case, I'm starting to get a little bit excited. This is looking like it might be kind of interesting. As you have noticed, more than one designer has wrestled with this. So the next question becomes, why and how is it compelling to us as people?
Because the mechanics or the game itself?
No, the mechanics operating as a piece of the game is what I'm talking about. But the game as a whole, what I'm aiming at is when and how why do I believe that those red dice really are corruption? What is the nature of, in this case, the corporation, but in other genres, the bad? Here's a good example. If we were talking about fantasy, we would need some indicator that the corruption dice mattered. They weren't just a score in some Minecraft mod that you were trying to keep low. Instead, it would be like in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, just to take that one book, the first book in the Narnia series. Well, the first published book in the Narnia series. Rather than chronological, but the one that most people start with. And you take that and you say, why is the White Witch bad? Well, if you read the book, there's no doubt. It's not even a moral, it is a moral identity. Stopping the White Witch and releasing the grip of winter on Narnia and saving the critters, and the tragedy of the poor creatures who had become statues, and if you reread, actually I recommend rereading the book, the sequence when the oldest boy, Peter, has his first sword fight, a first real battle with a monster, which happens to be this awful wolf, and how terrifying the fight is. and how you really want him to kill that fucking wolf. Okay, I mean, you really want this wolf to go, and the danger of doing it is a big deal. And when the youngest, well, not the youngest kid, but the younger boy gets turned by the witch, and how you can feel it. You're like, oh, I get it. You know, he was pissed at his big brother. He was jealous of his sister. She fed him candy. She petted him. You know, he got to ride in a fancy chariot. He can become, you know, the king of Narnia, you know, subject to her, of course. But, you know, and they were all talking about this imaginary lion, childish tales. You're not a child anymore, Edmund. You can grow up and be a king here in Narnia. You know, and you can feel it. I mean, you're like puking as you're reading this, right? It's really gross. And especially because, you know, her treatment of him as a young man is very inappropriate. He's a boy. And there's something really creepy about, and she's not like overly sexual or seductive at all, but the fact that she's doing this at that level, that imbalance, is really creepy. And that's what I'm talking about. Whether it's fantasy, cyberpunk, you know, whatever it is that people are going to play this game with, how's the bad going to be really bad? I'm talking about the fiction.
Well, we have talked about the power's pillars, which are motivations or ideals that the power has to really control this world, control this scenario, and that responds to certain things like, well, I have 3 in testing and I haven't talked with Angel, but it serves as an example here.
Yeah.
For example, order. Why we have the right to rule this world? This you have to the GM answers this. The other question is what we offer to people that join us freely. Mm-hmm. And the last question is, what happens if you don't comply to our bid?
Mm-hmm. Those are all good, but what I would suggest, and I don't know if you should follow this model, but and the trouble is that it's easy for it to get out of control. I mean, that's not the right word. It's easy for it to be unproductive sometimes. But in the game I'm thinking of, it's never unproductive. I'm thinking of My Life with Master. Who makes the master?
Everyone, right?
Yeah. But the GM is supposed to take a very receptive role. Mm-hmm. When the GM does nothing except dramatize and express exactly what they were given by the players really hate the master. Like a lot. A good example from a game I played long ago was they had a sort of a failed aristocratic master who lived in this, you know, echoing old mansion of the family and was very elitist. And one of the minions had a crippled leg, and so walked painfully, you know, with his cane. And I described, when we started the very first scene, and they had described the master, and he was bitter and bent and, you know, grumpy and very, very much a cold old man. And and very into his status. That's what he wanted. He wanted his status back. He wanted, you know, all these privileges, and he wanted everybody to know their place. So, fine. I described how there was a curving staircase from the Great Hall, And halfway up was an area that was set up with his chair and his things, and he liked to sit there and look over the great hall. You know, kind of like a place where you might have breakfast or something like that, but you could see over the great hall on this balcony. And there was this curving stair that went up to it. Well, he wanted to talk to this minion. So he just gestures to him, and he makes the guy with the cane walk all the way up the stairs in that curve to get up there step by painful step. And of course he doesn't move a muscle, he's just waiting for him until he's standing in front of him, and then he talks to him. By the time I was done describing that climb up the stairs, every single player hated that master like nothing you ever believed. And they were the ones who had given me all the raw material to use. Even though none of them had described the hall or described that scene or any of its details. And he didn't say, oh, the master makes him walk to him. Nobody said anything like that. That was me working with what they gave me. But since I captured exactly what they had described and tied it into the minion specifically, the less than human side of the minion, they really felt it. So some aspect of this could serve you very, very well.
Yeah.
So those are some the dynamics in question. Because what we need to avoid is the corporation which is evil because it's a corporation because it's evil, and it is evil because it's a corporation, and now all we're going to get is these kind of 80s villains who really aren't, you know, and they can sweat and spit and shoot their servants and, you know, do all the bad things that they do in those movies, but we all know that it's just filling time. I mean, we don't really care.
One other thing that we want kind of from the power is that it has to be tempting to embrace it for the players. That the thing they're fighting for is also what is kind of giving them power, what is allowing them to fight, and using that power is what corrupts them.
Sure, I get that. So the question then really becomes, I can tell you the way that works. I mean, it's very fundamental. There just is there can't be an alternative. There is no other source of power. There is no revolutionary underground to contact. There is no, or if there is, you know, they're ineffective. There isn't anything else to do. This is the way. If
But
they
then you
believe,
have-
yeah.
But then you have relationship which give you die.
Oh, I get all that. But what I'm talking about is in the fiction, there's no alternative except to embrace the power as a means of fighting it. You can't go off and say, well, I'm going to go and get weapons from the underground and become a guerrilla warrior in the cellar.
Yeah.
You know, and we're going to attack the corporation. You know, that's not possible. And so the players' characters are people who have realized this and are willing to do it. They're like, we have got to move up to make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, but to have that fixed in the fiction, no matter what the genre, that's a big deal.
That's basically central to the conflict mechanic.
But if I didn't say that to the players before they started making stuff up, things would go off the rails. They would just get all excited by the genre and make their hacker, you know. Somebody would make a character from The Matrix, another person would make a character from Neuromancer, and another person would make a character, I don't know, probably Indiana Jones or some shit like that. So, so that knowledge that your characters have and that the players have, which is that this is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
And
you will
there's
have
no other source of power that can combat this.
and you will have some sort of mm, power to maybe manage this corruption better, but
Right.
you won't.
But you can't
like,
avoid it. I mean, you
Yeah.
have to move up in terms of the companies or the enemies. You have to move up in terms of its own values in order to pose a significant threat.
Yeah, you will try to minimize the risk of corruption, but you will corrupt.
Right, but you have to get there. You have to be in the position where it could get you. So, okay. Does this help a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are we okay? And another thing then is how operations oriented is play. Do we say, okay, we're sitting for a session and somebody says, okay, where's the briefing? What's our agreement this session for what we're doing now? And you have a briefing phase, mission preparation phase. Okay, everybody, fill out this sheet, whatever. I'm actually thinking that it might be a little more fun in a game like this to be a little bit more developmental, a little bit more interactive in terms of deciding what they're going to do directly.
Yeah, I have seen this game like a journey.
Right.
You have one the beginning, and you have the end, and you have the certain stages of the journey. Then you will find series, you will find events, you will find things that makes you gain resources to keep going against.
If we look at some of those games that I mentioned, and Misspent Youth, and if we're going to include Bliss Stage, we will. They are very stage and step and operation by operation oriented. They're very, very clear about. They've got a little track, that you move down in terms of scenes. In Misspent Youth, in Bliss Stage, of course, you have your very specific. Okay, this is a personal scene. This is a mission scene. And you proceeding through the missions has specific consequences. Proceeding through personal scenes has specific consequences. Whereas Shock is a little bit more free-formy in some ways. Although when you shift to another protagonist, another person becomes the antagonist and starts to operate, negatively toward that character. But still, it's a little looser about when we start and stop scenes. It's a little bit... And in Shock, there is a story tracker, like a plot point tracker kind of thing. But what's interesting about it is that you can always choose to chop it off. If the fiction ends, you don't have to keep going because you still have these points. But if you run out of points, then you have to finish. You have to finish it out. So it's a limiter, but it's not a... But it doesn't force you to, okay, after we've played 7 missions, the game ends. Or we play missions until we accumulate this many points of bliss, and it ends. Whatever. See what I mean? It doesn't operate like that. So and now there's one more that has a structure that's loose in some ways, which is the Mountain Witch. There are 4 chapters on the mountain itself, over the gates into the area of the Citadel, inside the the main Citadel itself, and then finally confronting the witch, if I remember correctly. But the point is that there are 4 of these chapters. What's kind of interesting is that Tim, the author, it makes it very clear that the length of each chapter doesn't really matter. And it's not like, okay, in this chapter, this variable is going to get resolved and changed. And then in this other chapter, this other variable is going to get resolved and changed. There's nothing like that. So really, I mean, you could do like a chapter in 15 minutes and then spend 3 sessions on the next one, if that's the way it goes. It doesn't really matter. And what does matter is the trust among the characters keeps changing with the way that play goes. And the meaning of the chapters is only to create a sense of we are succeeding. The mission is succeed. The stated mission to go kill the Mountain Witch. It's working. We're getting closer. And that provides all you need for the trust to matter more and more and more. Even though the foes, although they can get more interesting inside, deeper in, they don't really get more dangerous. It's not as though you're leveling up to bigger and bigger bosses. That doesn't happen either. Mm-hmm. So it's really very interesting in this regard because although there are these phases, they serve as soft but effective alterations to the meaning of the mechanic. And remember, in that game, it's not like, oh, okay, you know, I've hit 4 trust in this character, so therefore I have to do this now. Mm-hmm. Right? Or the chapter flips when somebody reaches this many, you know, and so many trust points have been expended, then we flip to a new chapter. There's nothing like that at all. So when we're working with structural elements of play, it's incredibly important to decide what is hard and what is soft. Mm-hmm. And it may surprise you in some games what's soft, because it can be very, very, very important in play. So those are some of the variables that will be very important for you in terms of the play experience. That's why the games I have named all have different ways of approaching episodic efforts on the parts of the characters as a ideologically committed team. Mm-hmm. But they're very different in terms of their structure and what things are quantified and what things are not quantified. So,
one interesting example that came to mind is from this game, Iron Swarm, which is fairly recent. It has a mechanic for going on quests, basically, and the other stuff. And basically, you have to fill a track, and you make rolls to fill a track, and you may add some marks or lose some more. But the point is, you don't need to fill the track to complete the quest. It's just going to make it more likely that you do. But you can attempt to complete the quest at any point.
I'm not saying this should be the same, but I am saying that it is very interesting to examine your structural features that let you know where the priorities lie.
Yeah, we have talked about not caring as much about if they succeed or not, like at the mission or whatever, but what's the effect on them? Are they going to become corrupted?
How corrupted are they? Well, this is where Circle of Hands also becomes relevant, where the characters are not quite on a mission, but they're going to a certain area with specific ideology of theirs in mind. They arrive, except in very specific edge cases. What they do there will have a positive impact on the setting. It will serve the purposes of their king, but also those purposes of the king relative to everything else are pretty good. So that's not really the problem. It's possible that it might not happen, but not due to anything that they do. It's not like so many failed rolls means the mission won't work. Nothing like that. So, therefore, the players say, well, then what do we care about? What do we care about with our characters? And the answer is how you do it. Mm-hmm. Do you want to be, it's going to work. Do you want to be proud of that or not? And so that there's elements of that which are relevant to your design. I'm not saying it's the same thing or that would be the same solutions mechanically, but that question is relevant to your design.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in this game we have I think we have two central mechanics. One is corruption and the other are relationships. And I
Right.
think that the success of a mission or failure is not the point. The point is to really grow up this relation,
Right.
because that's at the long game. That's what makes you better and more competent to fight the evil, to fight the power.
Yeah, relationships are supposed to be the opposing force to corruption,
Right.
essentially. That what is keeping you away from, what is allowing you to try to stay away from it.
Sure. I get that. This is okay. So at this point, it sounds as though you've got enough pieces in place. When you try to play it, you'll see how your pieces are badly designed. Unfortunately. I wish there was an easier way. But you'll find out what pieces look good on paper, but are very hard either for people to understand, or their impact isn't what you expected. You'll find out where people get it and where they don't. And here's the biggest question. You're going to need to find out what the GM actually does.
Yeah.
And now, with everything that we talked about, let's all three go back and read that document again.
Okay.
And see if the document is saying anything like what we're talking about. And I emphasize something very importantly. Never minds the gamer who's reading this as instructions. We're going to write that document later.
Yeah.
That's really, I wish I had learned that lesson before, earlier. That your playtest document is not a rough draft of the book. And doesn't have to be. Right now we're just writing something that puts everything written down so that we know what we're looking at, and that's all we need. You don't have to think of a naive reader coming to it and being inspired enough to play. We don't need to, we can worry about that later. What kind of length of play are we talking about? Multiple sessions, I assume.
Yeah.
But there is going to come a time when the characters basically rise or fall.
Yeah. Wrap themselves and fall and die. And
now, is that a group? Now, you say they all use a track. Let's say they share a track on it. Okay. So, but I assume that the track is... That's the other thing, though. You say you don't have to fill... If you fill the track, then you have to finish. But if you...
Yeah.
But is there a way to finish without filling the track?
Basically,
that's the bit that filling the track is the loose state.
Okay.
If that happens because you take that before you take down the corporation, you all sold out.
Right. So therefore, there is a way to finish if you can possibly win before that. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I get it. Not bad.
Yeah, you defeat the evil, the power, or you get corrupted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Like characters can become so set out individually, but also the group as a whole has this.
Right. Well, that's the other interesting point. How do you lose characters along the way, and how do you handle that, or if that happens?
Well, that happens with the relationship. We have range of relationship, and with it, they turn to 4. They follow you on your path to the evil, and then I assume this is. We haven't talked about the example, but I assume that when you change this relationship on 4, which you have one for each of the 3 ideals, you lose that person, and the other person joins the party.
Right.
More or less, yeah.
Yeah. So you guys are still working on that a little bit, but that's okay. With the dynamic is what matters at this moment.
One thing we didn't talk about is that relationships evolving and becoming important to you. So far, our idea is that was kind of the experience, where the experience points come. Well,
it's like love. It's just like love in My Life with Master. I think. It's a score that builds and you can use.
Yeah, when you get to 1, 2, 3, you can use that dice when that relationship aids you on the fiction.
Right.
But and you have options to make that relationship come up to the fiction.
Right. Right. Well,
that-
certainly it's a huge responsibility of the GM to play the relationship characters well. That's very important. So,
but they have a statement for what they want the character, his relation, his related, what they want what they want them to change about character.
Excellent.
How big part is relationships changing you?
Right.
And how? Yeah.
So that's a good mark to interpret that NPC.
Yeah.
For the,
yeah. Guys, thanks. Nobody ever consults with me asking, how do we get the average gamer? You know, we have to get this in there for the average gamer. Kind of like.
Our current aesthetics in relation to that is, I don't think we are going to be able to sell this. So yeah, we are going the right direction.
That's right.
the end state of the game, they finish the game and they cannot continue playing. We were like, no one is going to want to play.
That's right. No, you would
we
say,
are keeping it. We are keeping it.
Right. You would say, if we must be marginal, we will make the most of it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. We want the people approaching this game, hating us and writing posts about you motherfucker.
Yeah.
We lost this game. We lost 3 years of our.
We lost 3 years of our lives, and the corporation still is strong. And my character was corrupted. My character became an asshole, and it's all your fault. Yeah.
We want the Vincent Baker's hate email.
Wow, there is just no way out of this. You know,
we are fucked.
Yeah, it's like.
It is a fucking mess.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, on that wonderful note, and that's why we're making this game.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I brought it up. Consulting point. So, got to get you angry to make this happen. So.
Yeah, I'll keep that in mind as I design this game.
Exactly. All right, guys. Good night. Great to see you. Yeah.
Talk to you soon.